Well, I'm in Cambridge, as I mentioned. We have three real participants today. I'm not one of them, and I will just briefly introduce all three of them. So James Ball is the global editor of the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, and he was previously at BuzzFeed and also at The Guardian, and is the author of a number of relevant books, including Post-Truth and Bluffocracy. And then our second participant today is Yoichiro Tateiwa. We're going to call him Yoi because that's easier. He is a Japanese investigative journalist and the founder and executive editor of In Fact, which is a non-profit online media organization and fact checker in Japan. And he previously was at NHK, which is Japan's equivalent of the BBC. And he's also the executive director of the Japan Center for Money and Politics, which he co-founded. And he is also an author of numerous books, including What is Fact Checking, which won a Book of the Year award a couple of years ago. And then our chair today is going to be James Harding. So he is co-founder and editor of Tortoise Media, and previously was director of news and current affairs at the BBC. And also before that was the editor of the Times newspaper. But most importantly, he is a trustee of the Daiwa Anglo-Japanese Foundation. And I'm going to hand straight over to James now to chair the rest of it. There is a brief timeline of how it's going to pan out. James, over to you.
Thank you, Jason. And more importantly, still a former Daiwa Anglo-Japanese Foundation scholar. One of my very first jobs when I was sent on the scholarship, Jason, was working in Tokyo. I had to do the newspaper clips, international newspaper clips, and then because I was that important, the photocopying of the newspaper clips. But of course, I think that leads us perfectly into the subject that we're facing today, because to an extent, I don't know whether your screen spotted it, Jason, but the reason that the world is so different, of course, is that you don't need a photocopier to distribute news anymore. That the distribution of news has become an issue, and we are caught between a debate around freedom of speech and freedom of reach. How do we distribute the information that we get? And we're really lucky in having James and Yoi with us. Tateiwa-san, I'm calling you Yoi because apparently that's an easier way of doing things, so I hope that's all right with you. I was going to start by asking you both actually a very simple question. And Yoi, I'm going to ask you first, which is, what are you most worried about now?
Well, a lot of things, but to be honest, like, you know, if you look at it, the fake news or the misinformation in Japan, it doesn't matter if you're a liberal or conservative. They don't really, you know, stand on the place where the truth or fact are important. They rather, you know, the conservative, liberal, they all like you stand on their political position and bragging about, you know, what they believe. So this is, you know, the issue here in Japan. So it's kind of hard to say who is doing the wrong thing. It's everybody, practically everybody. So you can't differentiate, he's a good man, he's a bad man. So I could be the one who can spread the misinformation in some days. So what I'm telling the people here is that just focusing on what is truth, what is fact, and we should stand on the base that, you know, what is right or what, no, not as what is right or what is wrong, more what is the fact. So we have to focus on what is fact, but which is not really the case in Japan. That's what I worry the most.
James?
I think I tend to find myself wishing that we had a problem of either fake news versus good news, and we could lump the two separately and sort of tackle them. I think we are increasingly ending up with quite a complicated problem where true bits of a narrative and false bits of a narrative sort of smash into each other somewhat. And it starts to become about people see the same news story and start seeing very different interpretations of it. And where this really comes into a problem with the media is sort of exemplified by any UK listeners will be very familiar with the online refrain, "Why isn't the BBC covering this?" Usually accompanied by a link to the BBC. But it's become a kind of narrative in the UK that the BBC doesn't do accountability journalism against the government, or among a different subset of British people, that the BBC wants to shame anything to do with Brexit and will talk the country down and is virtually a kind of radical left-wing organisation. And in some cases, what sort of makes it difficult is people can always find a kind of justification for what they're saying. If you say, hey, this story you say the BBC isn't covering, it's on their website. Well, it's not leading their website. Actually, it is leading the website. Well, it wasn't on the 10 o'clock news. Well, it was on the 10 o'clock news. Well, yes, but they framed it wrong. And people will stick to their sense, and people will stick to their anger and their tribes and to their narratives in such a way that actually, you know, it felt to me 10 years ago we had a problem of fake news or of misinformation or things that needed debunking. It feels that we've ended up now in somewhere where it's all merging a little bit and becoming all the worse for it.
Can I, the reason I asked James and Yuri about what you're most worried about now is that I'm really aware that, firstly, this was a problem that existed pre-internet, that there was polarization in the news organizations that we've all worked for, that there was also just bad journalism. You know, these are problems. So we can't pin everything on technology, but there are some things that are clearly technology problems, right? And that we've moved from worrying about the algorithm, from data breaches to now deep fakes, to bots, to, you know, a range of questions about private social networks where misinformation is happening beyond social media platforms that we can see, i.e. this is a problem that is growing, it's not getting any smaller. And so I wonder whether or not, when you look at that whole world of managing information movements on the internet, and I think we can all agree it's getting worse rather than better, what you think are the interventions? What do you think are the things that can be done to help make that better? And I'm going to ask you, James, first, and I'll come to you in a sec.
So increasingly, I think we need to try and have, I feel like too often we play whack-a-mole. We look at the latest manifestation of misinformation, what's grabbing people at the moment, and more effort gets put in content moderation or in sort of content to take that down. And so at the moment, we're all very worried about vaccine misinformation. And so Facebook and others come up with specific policies to be stricter on vaccine misinformation, all of which relies on the work of independent fact checkers and journalists. And so it's a huge amount of effort. It's intrinsically an asymmetric battle. If you have a good imagination, it takes 5 seconds to invent a claim. It can take really quite a lot of reporting to knock it down. The odds are against you. You are outnumbered, and it's a lot easier for them than it is for you. What I sort of increasingly think is we need to move the focus to trying to get good information in front of people in a way that they might look at it. And one thing that I really think about now is trying to actively force news content to be against the algorithm. So
what does that mean, James?
So any social network that you look at tries to categorize the posts that you see. Facebook knows whether a post it's showing you is a baby picture or is news content. Twitter tries to categorize tweets that include news as well. And at the moment, Facebook will really start to tailor your news feed. So if you start seeing, say, news with negative sentiment about a certain ethnic group or religious group, you'll see more and more of it because you're training the algorithm. I think if you forced Facebook or Twitter, or just asked them to try and weight the algorithm so that at least half the news content you see is not at all personalized to you, but instead is weighted, say, to what the biggest news organizations in your country are leading with, you force more and more people to see the same headlines. And so at least you're then living in the same news world as people. You're not living in a world where you've seen one set of stories and the person you will argue with has seen another one. It's not going to fix everything overnight.
Yeah.
But I do think when it comes to news, which is our window to the world and everything that we interact with, we need to actively force people to look at some of the same material. And I think it could really start to move the dial a bit.
I mean, James, just for what it's worth, I had a conversation with someone at one of the big tech platforms just before Christmas, and we were talking about exactly this issue. And he said to me, but you see, the beauty of our feed is that it's tailored by your personal preferences, to cater to your personal preferences. And I said, but is there not a problem with that? And there was this awkward long silence where he thought that I was being so statist and paternalistic, right? Rather than saying, no, there must be a tension between the me and the we. There must be a tension between what's social and what's personal. Yoey, why don't you come on this? Because you had a time, I worked at the BBC for a while, and I know you worked at NHK for a while, and this tension of how you deliver publicly valuable information and also privately valuable information. I just wonder how you think of it.
It's kind of hard. Well, when I was in NHK, it's the mainstream media, so we don't really think about what we're reporting on. Just that we're reporting on what we think, what is important to the public.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be true, but we're just sending the message and the news. But after I became the like a freelance, and I look at all these news media, I would say there's not much that they can do, and so as all these Facebook and all these, I'm emphasizing right now is like just the people, focusing on people, because like all this technology, we focusing on who are using it, us, everybody. So it's more the matter of how we use it. So it's information technology is booming and everybody using it, and now we're focusing at this, so many people using this platform to spread the fake news. But at the same time, we can change it. We can change if and only if we focusing on just this fact checking. And so I regard fact checking as just a civic movement, not the part of the media. So everybody can be involved. And then if we can be successful telling the people, just focusing on what is true or not, then we probably be better learning to use this very convenient tools of internet technology. That's what I think.
Yoey, can we do this? And James, if I wanted to take two cases as a way of examining fake news and how it's developing, and think about what we do about it. And the two cases I wanted to take were ones that I think touched the UK and Japan, but touched the world. And so one was Donald Trump, and the other is, in the UK at least, Yoey, and I've tried to research a little bit about how this is impacting Japan, but the the most popular conspiracy theory of 2020 as regard the coronavirus was around 5G. At least in the UK, that was the most, probably the most, not the only one, but certainly one of the most popular. So can we just talk about Donald Trump and start with that one first? Because if we were having this conversation in 2016 rather than 2021, I think we would be talking about a small lie. The thing that would be, if you like, Exhibit A is a website post that announces that the Pope has endorsed Donald Trump, right? And this took off, and we talk about the speed of its spread and also its reach, right? In 2021, and after the events on Capitol Hill on January the 6th, I think we're talking about a big lie. We're talking about the number of people who are either worried about the election result or genuinely believe Donald Trump's claim that he won a landslide. And I just wonder what you think the Trump case tells us about the relationship between the news and politics. And Yoi, I'd be really interested to know how you think that reverberates in Japan.
Surprising, I because of my background, studying the Washington D.C., I appear on the TV news and comment on the D.C. elections, and I was just simply telling what's happening, and Joe Biden was winning. It didn't all sound like all these smear attack on me, saying that he's lying and Trump is winning, and there's many false doing happening in the U.S. elections and all this by Japanese. It's surprising. He's not president of Japan, anyway. Yeah. So, but when I look at all these comments and I'm looking into their tendency, it's a clear tendency was that their pro ruling party, Japanese LDP, and then Prime Minister Abe, and then he likes President Trump. And clear tendency was that they hate China, they hate Koreans. So those are more the very typical kind of like a discriminatory kind of tendency they have. And so if I try to find some reasonable kind of thinking that maybe they fear the rising power of China, and then they want to just support someone who could be tough on China, and these kind of simple the mind probably that is controlling them, and that was the case, I think.
And do you think that? How worried are you about the implications of this for Japanese democracy? i.e., how much do you think you're going to see people copying the techniques and approach in the United States in Japan?
What I worry was on it could be a little. It could not be the answer to your the question, but so it's connected to ruling party. I don't want to be so political, but so these people who are supporting Trump or supporting or attacking China, they're supporting the ruling party, and so it's supposed to the party should be more. They call themselves the Liberal Democratic Party, so it should be more the liberal and should be more democratic. But it turns out that those. I believe that's not the huge portion of the supporters, but some of those people are strongly backing the ruling party. So that could probably somehow affecting the democracy of this country. That's what I worry the most, and especially when it comes to media, because as you know, Japan historically speaking, that is always, one dominant party is controlling it. So it's not like the UK.
Mm.
So that would probably be sooner or later connected with those the fake news, or those people who spreading fake news. So that's what I worry the most, and that's what we have to be very careful with it.
Okay, James, what do you read from the sort of the development of Trump and fake news?
It's not a legitimate debating technique, but there's a technique known as the Gish Gallop, and it's a term that means when someone floods a debate with loads and loads of arguments. They can be incoherent, they can be unrelated to one another, they can be outright false. But instead of trying to build a persuasive case, instead of trying to actually win something over, you can kind of do the Democrats spend all the money, I never said anything racist, build the wall, I hate everyone who's not American, I would never say I hated anyone. And you just fire off fallacious argument after fallacious argument. And that leaves the other side left with either trying to do lengthy, disconnected rebuttals and rejoinders and fact checks and sort of bury themselves in it. Or you can say, well, look, I said this, they had no answer to it. And it feels like the last 4 years with Donald Trump have been one long Gish Gallop. And we've just had this relentless stream of sort of falsehood. And, I think we ended up falling into the trap that it sets, which is that, they get to at least put something across by doing their disconnected series of arguments, and you're left entirely on their terms, sort of battling it. I thought one of the more interesting bits of the early Trump White House was the Bowling Green Massacre, where Kellyanne Conway on a live TV debate essentially invented a massacre by Islamist terrorists. And the news media got incredibly excited about this. Oh, they've got it wrong. We've got them on the ropes. People. So sorry, don't know what that is. People smell blood in the water. What it let the White House then do was put out a list. This was during the time when they were trying to stop people from majority Muslim countries entering the US. The White House then put out a list of about 50 terror attacks around the world that had been sort of connected to Islamist terror. And then all the news bulletins led with footage from those different things to prove that they'd covered them.
Right.
Not exactly the images that the Trump White House wanted on there. And so there's all sorts of ways when you're dealing with falsehood that you can deal with it badly. And I think we never really actually got a good grip on how to cope with it, which meant that, but we did sort of get more and more used to a baseline level of falsehood, a baseline level of chaos, a baseline level of craziness from the US. And that has expanded and the temperature's risen. And so I think there's more going on with some of the deeper conspiracies, but I do think that's the sort of effect several years of Trump have had on us.
Well, I hadn't heard the phrase of the Gish Gallop, but I have to say a barrage of arguments that are some true, some not, some entirely made up is kind of a brilliant description. And also, as I was listening to you, James, I thought possibly a good guide to parenting. But maybe that's the way you go dealing with some of the stuff that's coming the other way. Yuri, can I just pick up on the point that James just made there, which is about the media's response to what it hears and sees and the ways in which it's been played, or it has, if you like, aided and abetted this problem. You mentioned right at the beginning the relationship of the media to what was happening online, the traditional media, the legacy media. How much do you think the responsibility lies still with the mainstream media in terms of what it chooses and what it promotes?
About you mean the conspiracy theory is concerned?
Yeah, I mean, James's example is of, the extent to which the White House, in effect, played the media, baited the media, and then all the footage that then plays on rolling cable channels
Mhm.
actually lands the point, if not literally, emotionally.
What's happening in the U.S. is probably, in a way, nightmare. That we're not reaching the point yet, but we're about to be reaching. And then, so well, there are a couple of things that the media can do. Is probably the way they report has to be reconsidered to be not used by people like a Trump. But we probably have to figure that out, the how.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know any answers. And so, but it's, still think that there are many, not many things that the media can do. Media has their own job. When you talk about the mainstream media, they have to report on the story.
Mm-hmm.
Like at BBC say, the important people always talk to BBC. That's their job.
Mm-hmm.
That could be a fake news too, but they have to report on the story based on what they say. So there has to be some other function besides mainstream media. They have to be maybe fact checking is one of those the function we have to be with. So mainstream media with other functions, or they work together.
Mm-hmm. It's been one of these, it's become a truism of the fake news industry that the fact checkers can't keep up with the falsifiers because facts and fact checking can be more boring, Yoey, than kind of lies and fantasies. And I wonder what you think of that.
They make a lot more money than fact checking. So,
and there's also more money. I hadn't thought of that, but yes. Sorry, you're going to answer.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is like, yeah, it's boring and not entertaining, but so I say the fact checking is more on the civic movement, supposed to be. So the media cannot just stand on the place where they live in a safe place and they just look, all this, they know what's happening, but they have to, what is very important, they have to come back to our place or the people's place and work together. So they do their job, but at the same time, when it comes to talk about the fact checking, I think the media knows how to do it. So they have to lead the people, to tell the people what to do with it, the basic part of the fact checking, so that we could be involved with the fact checking, not as the spectators or the audience, but as the part of fact checkers. So many, I might be a little bit idealistic, but I think the more people work together with the fact checking, I would hope the less people to spread the fake news.
Yoey, thank you. I can see Paul Farrelly's got his hand up, and I'm going to come to him in 1 minute. Paul, for those of you who don't know, was a Labour MP and actually did a fair bit to shape my thinking about this and the conduct in the public square when he was doing that. So I'm going to come to Paul. I'm going to come to Paul, if I might, in 1 minute. But I just want to finish up with this point about the second element on fake news that I wanted to discuss, which was 5G and coronavirus conspiracies. I don't know whether you saw, you may not have seen it, Yoey, but Mick Jagger released a song this week, and the song was a parody of the pandemic year, and it included the line, shooting the vaccine, Bill Gates is in my bloodstream, it's mind control, the earth is flat and cold, it's never warming up, the Arctic's turned to slush, the second coming's late, there's aliens in the deep state. And it's one of those perfect moments in our modern world, because then the media picked up on Mick Jagger as being a believer in the Bill Gates conspiracy theory, when actually he was trying to parody the people who were believers in the conspiracy theory. And actually, James, why don't I give you a go at this first? What do you think, all of this taken together, 5G conspiracy theories or Bill Gates, etc., what's happening in terms of the way in which the public understands issues of public health? And just to be contrary for a minute, are we over worrying this? Because is it not the case that 50 or 100 years ago, the world lived in much greater ignorance? And so there've always been such conspiracy theories. It's just that we see them now online.
I'll start with your last point there. We are absolutely over worrying it, but that doesn't mean it's not a problem. The public is better informed, more media literate, more literate full stop than they ever have been. People consume more news from more sources than they ever did. I think part of the problem is the elite, by which I do sort of mean the media as much as sort of politicians in the top of society, actually get a much better view of society now than they did pre-internet. I do sort of sometimes feel like when journalists especially talk about misinformation and polarization and fake news, that we imagine 25 years ago everyone bought a broadsheet in the morning, read it cover to cover, and sat sagely with their partners discussing the news of the day in an impartial way. You know, I do know reporters who, if they got a down pager on page 11 of their paper, would assume that meant the full circulation of the paper had read it. Because, you know, they would say, well, 250,000 people read this in print. Why am I supposed to be pleased that 20,000 read it online? And it's like, because a lot of articles get 5,000. And so I think we have a fantasy sometimes of how things used to be. This actually is a more informed and a more engaged public. You know, you can look at, in the UK at least, very high vaccine uptake rates, despite all the 5G noise, despite all of that, and say, to some extent, actually, on important things where people care and put the thought into it, you can still win trust to new things. You can still get people over. But you can also look at Europe and, you know, look at France's vaccine uptake rates, etc., and see that that doesn't have to be a given. It can go wrong. We do have to take this seriously. Where I think we hit a problem with things like 5G is it's very easy to lump together people who think Bill Gates is putting a microchip in you to control your brain with people who are just worried about 5G. And one of the better debunks I did for this, I actually did for you thinking about it. But we didn't interview someone who was saying it was a conspiracy to take over the world and sort of run it. It was a woman who was just absolutely convinced it made lots of people ill. And I spoke to a sort of a physicist about it, and she said, absolutely, it's dangerous. She went, I use MRIs to scan people's brains, and the machine I use, I have to turn off after 40 seconds, because if I leave it on longer, it could cook your brain cells. She went, we don't like heating things up. That's bad. And she went, but that's the exact same technology as 5G. I understand exactly the safe levels. I understand how it disperses. It's not that it's completely safe and you're irrational to worry about it. It's that it's not actually a new technology. And I thought it was the best description and the best way of doing it I'd ever heard, because it started from where the person is. Mm-hmm. It starts from, of course, this could be dangerous. Here's why it's not. Yeah. Rather than, how could you possibly think that, you silly, you silly small person? And so often we start at, ha ha ha, aren't you stupid for thinking this?
Yeah, the disparity. Yoi, what do you think about conspiracy theories in the year of the pandemic and what we've learned?
That was like the year ago. International Fact Check Network asked everybody around the world to collaborate fact checking on this pandemic, and the first thing the came up to us was about the Bill Gates and dealing with 5G, and he created this COVID-19 to make money and all these. So we take it seriously, the approach, and because like it was all over, not just in English world. It was also in Japan too. I don't know why they're spreading, but so we just to check every single these kind of misinformation happen to be misinformation, and it's a very tiresome work. But the thing is, all this vaccine and 5Gs, and it might be true that, you know, I'm not saying they're the problem itself, but they could cause the health issues too. So they pick the part of the facts and broader the things, and putting another narratives and the spreading. So the way we do is like we have to pick the one by one and check it and with the evidence and tell the people what is right and what is true and what is false. And in the end, they don't trust us.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being so straight about that. We may be in a battle for truth. I have lost my battle with time, and I see that we're now facing the top of the hour. So what I am going to do is bring things to a close, but chiefly just by saying thank you. You know, I know that everyone has lived on Zoom for a year, and so it's a big thing to give up an hour's time to come together for a conversation like this. Can I just say a small thank you to Jason, James, and particularly to Nana Ota for making this happen and bringing us all together. Hats off to the Daiwa Foundation, but a particular thank you to you, Yoi, and to you, James. We can't clap you, we can't buy you a drink, we could barely do anything. We can just wave at you. Actually, Jason is using the applause emoji of Zoom. That's as good as it gets, I'm afraid, people. But thank you very much indeed for joining us, and see you soon.